Professor Fuller joined the faculty at George Mason University in 1994 as the professor of public policy and regional development. He served as the director of the PhD program for public policy from 1998 to June 2000, and from July 2001 to July 2002. In September of 2001, the GMU Board of Visitors appointed him as university professor. And in July of 2002, he was named the Dwight Schar, did I pronounce that correctly? Mm-hmm. The Dwight Schar Faculty Chair and the Director of the Center of Regional Analysis. He served in this capacity until May of 2015. He currently holds the position of the Director of the Stephen S. Fuller Institute, and probably doesn't have a terrible commute every morning. Dr. Fuller received a BA in economics from Rutgers University and his doctorate in regional planning and economic development from Cornell University. He has authored more than 800 articles, papers, and reports in the fields of urban and regional economic development, including monthly reports on the Washington metropolitan area and Fairfax County economies. Professor Fuller's recent research has focused on the structure of the Washington metropolitan area economy, how this has changed during the Great Recession, and how it will change going forward as the federal spending dependency diminishes.
I think that's enough.
Yeah, that's enough.
Well, you got it all on one page. Well, thank you for inviting me out here. I suspect some of you are expecting me to spend all of my time on one topic, but I was instructed by Sherman Patrick, who just slipped in here. He invited me to come and then left the country. That I should try to bring you up to date on how the economy is doing as well, and that's probably worth keeping track of, because if you're business people, you should know what you're up against. I will talk about Prince William County. I've dipped into it a little bit, and we will sort of look. I went back to 15 because 16, even though it seems a long time ago, some of the data are still in flux, and it just seemed like a nice 10-year period to look forward to, and I'll share that with you, and we'll get to this issue that falls out of that about the land use mix and the fiscal implications of that. That's a really big topic unto itself, and we may have to have a follow-up seminar on that. So anyway, this organization that was named after me, I call it to your attention only in as much as we produce very regular information about the Washington area. We only look at the Washington area economy, and it's all free. It's on our website. We do a monthly report. It comes out about the third week of every month, called Washington Economy Watch. Anybody who wants to be on our listserv, if you just give me a card, I will make sure you're notified. We release a report on something that I think is interesting. You may not, but I think it's interesting every week. And one of the areas that we're looking at quite closely, and I'll take a couple minutes just to tell you this because it relates to you in ways that you might be able to think out quickly, is the demographic shifts that are going on in this region. And just to characterize that, we've tracked the baby boomers who came here 40 years ago and stayed. They bought houses, they invested, they got married, they had kids. They're still here. And until they retire, we don't see them leaving. And some of you are them. We came from somewhere. I'm sort of one of those. And the millennials are leaving faster than they're coming. In fact, the age cohort above them, the Generation X, are doing the same thing. And they're not investing, they're not settling down here and raising their family here to the degree that the baby boomers just carry this economy in this region. And the millennials are a very large generation, but they're coming here for 5 or 6 years, and they're leaving because it's too expensive, it's too congested, it's too hectic. They don't have the values that some of the baby boomers had, or maybe the opportunity. Life was a lot different. This was in a sense, when there are only 3 million people in the metro area, there's 6 now, you might think you could shape it. Well, today it's beyond shaping, maybe, unless you're an elected official and where you have some decision authority. But anyway, think of the real estate implications of the changing demography. A bunch of older people who are in houses they own who need to get out of those houses so they can capture their equity to use in their retirement. Baby boomers who don't want, or millennials who may not want to buy that house, it's too far out, or it's too big, or it's too expensive. The implications on the workforce is dramatic. And we haven't come to grips with that. I don't have answers for it, but we've done some studies on this, and we will do more. But anyway, every week something comes out. We're also watching the effects of changes in federal spending on the economy. That's sort of my favorite topic. I've been writing it now since the Reagan administration, so I'm going to stick with it for a while. So, I know your time is valuable. It's gotten a little cloudy. It's rainy a little bit now. It's spitting. Can't go play golf this afternoon. Yes, you can't. So we'll spend some time here. I'm going to give you an answer first. What I'm going to do is the first half of my time, or maybe a little bit more, to tell you about both the national economy and the local economy. The national economy is more important in this story than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. We're more like it as the federal government's influence on the economy has diminished. We are more influenced by what's going around. You can sort of see this in the fact that the sequester, a quick bounce back from the recession, not as deep a recession here because we were protected by the federal spending underlying our economy. At this point, it was about 40% of the economy. Today, it's about 30%. Economy's bigger, and the part that's growing isn't federal. So slowly, we're becoming we're less dependent on federal spending, which means we have to be more dependent on something else, which could be globally influenced or nationally. And the forecast, as best as we can figure that out, is that we're not going to do much better than the nation. The national forecast is actually, since I did this, and this is based on September data, because of the hurricanes, not Maria, because, interesting, Portugal isn't, Puerto Rico, I'm going to Portugal. Puerto Rico isn't included in our GDP calculations. It's independent. That's either good or bad, but so Irma and Patrick, what's the other one? Harvey, excuse me. Harvey and Irma, which took a lot of business offline in September and did some destruction too, and will have a lot of impact in reconstruction in Florida and Texas, particularly, and a little bit of Mississippi and Alabama. Will move this around. It's going to suppress this year a little bit, kick up next year, but the net of it won't affect us. Still, we are not projected to outperform like we used to. We used to do better than we're doing. That doesn't mean we can't. So that's sort of the answer. Let me give you a little sense of where we are. It's really interesting to me, and hopefully if you think back to your economics course, is to look at our current expansion, recovery if you prefer that word. It's 8 years old, 8.25 now. It's 8.25 going on 8.5 by the end of the calendar year. So this point starts in July of '09 for the current. These are other cycles that you may remember. This is the one that was right after this was this is '03 for the green line, and that's the recovery that came after the tech bubble burst. And it already went into recession, because here we are, if we track this along in years, this line is already to '07, and then here's the recession that actually feeds into this. So here's a shorter one. This long one up here, 82 to 91, is flattened out. We've almost run the course. We've had 12 of these since World War II. And right now, ours is the third longest. And if this goes until February of 2020, it'll be the longest one in history. 67 recession recovery cycles that they date back to 1850. And one could say, well, you know, it hasn't felt that good. We didn't even know we were in recovery for a while. It was so minimal for the first couple of years. And maybe we just don't have the distortions. This thing could go forever. On average, they last 5 years. We've already exceeded that. If anybody asked you when the next one's going to be, just say there's a 20%, 15 to 20% chance of a recession next year, because that's sort of the average of all years. In any event, here we are. We're still moving along quite nicely. And as I showed you, the peak is expected, the best year of this cycle isn't expected until next year. And that doesn't include any adjustment for the most recent tax proposal. So this, or an infrastructure program. So there's no stimulus in here, even though some may occur in the next year. So there's a way to watch this. I'll try not to stand in your way. There's a way to watch this, and so I'm going to show you just a couple of indicators that I track, so you can do it yourself. The National Leading Index has a 6 to 8 month, so a half year to 3/4 forward looking. It's a forecasting index, and this is August of '06. So we've been watching this thing way back then. Remember, the recession started in December of '07. If we've been watching this, we could have shifted our business plan or our investment strategies, and accordingly, especially as it gained here, this is where the recession started. So we already had an economy that was pulling back, and then it gained speed, and it started getting, it was still getting worse, but at a lesser amount each month. And so if you think about when the stock market turned, and had we all been smart enough, we'd say, well, we ought to start investing in things that are going to grow as the economy expands. The change in federal spending associated with the sequester not only affected the local economy, it affected the national economy. Because there were federal spending reductions everywhere. There were a couple other things going on here, but you can see that growth. This is something that I wish I could tell you why last year slowed down like this, but it was supposed to have been something like a 2.4% growth rate, and ended up as a 1.4. Isn't one thing you can point to. But right now, we have, and we might say, well, that was the turmoil introduced during the long campaign for the nominations for the presidential election. And here's, so if I'm on the Republican side of this, I'm saying, well, this is because we have a different model of leadership and expectation for the economy. Whatever it is, the economy's doing well. This, again, is looking forward. What it's forecasting is this line. This is the current economy. There's the recession of '07 to, we didn't really get going again until April of '10. A little bit of a sluggishness right after or following the implementation of the sequester. Pretty good performance, not as good as 15, but not bad. If you just look at these two indicators, looks like some acceleration, or this only goes through August, I believe. I don't think I have September yet. But these come out every month, and we can watch these. When they turn red, you probably ought to hunker down, because this has a long history dates back into the 30s, so we can look at how good this is. It does look forward about 6 to 8 months, so not a long time, but it says we're pretty good through maybe through April or May or mid-year next year. Not too much to worry about based on those things. Jobs came out today. The first Friday of every month, the national employment data come out. So the October data came out today, and there was a little bit of a bounce back. That little tiny, they always talk about monthly gains from one month to the next, which includes some seasonal factors, but this is from the same month the year before. A little bit of a decline there, and that's the hurricane effect. We lost 100,000 jobs in the hospitality sector. No surprise, they all came back. 90,000 of them came back. And so this had quite a good report for October. And we're averaging 160,000 jobs a month, quite strong for this length of time, this age of the recovery. So the economy isn't showing signs of stress yet. But it does, big job loss, as we know. This is the tech bubble burst. I will point out this just couldn't quite get going, and where are we? Right about here is when the Bush administration pushed through a reduction in taxes. You may remember it was about April of '03, and they had been withholding at a higher rate, and they gave that money back immediately. It was like your annual tax refund if you get one. This was a special tax refund. It all got spent, and it stimulated the economy, and pretty soon it was flying. It does show how fiscal policy can have a relatively short-term effect on the economy. We're better or worse, but it took that to get the economy going. This had a lot of stimulus behind it too. Whoop. So I'm a month out of date, but the implications I think are still important to pay attention to. So out of these 8, this is 1.8 million more jobs in September than a year ago. Half of them are in these 2 sectors. This is more than half. Shows how specialized the economy is. And the education and health services do not include K through 12. That's private education at the primary and secondary level. But it does include public colleges and community colleges, daycare, and health is a big piece of this, but so's the whole breadth of health. Education is a big piece of it. Health is also. The professional business services, each one of those jobs is worth about just simple. The math is relatively simple. This job generates about twice as much GDP as this job. So even though the numbers, and I'll show you this for Washington, for us here, even though the numbers are relative similarly, the value of this to the economy, because these are technical and scientific, they do have clerical and support, but overall these jobs are worth considerable more than that. Now those, and these jobs are worth considerably less than these. And, construction actually are quite valuable. Financial services are quite valuable too to the economy. I'm not talking about salary, although salary would be implied in this. The takeaway from this is that the private sector is growing. Information services isn't, but that's locally and nationally. This is national. But this is telecommunications. It's consolidations and not and media. So technology has taken its toll here. Government is generally not a major factor in the economy. Retail trade, I don't know what happened there, but that could be the hurricane. Took that out. Remember, it's just comparing September of this year to September of last year. But in any event, broad base of job growth across the economy, with 2 sectors leading. This isn't a balanced pattern. The unemployment rate came out today. It's down to 4.2%. We may have heard, it hasn't been that low since 2000. When the recession started in '09, it was 4.6. So you can say, well, and these are the forecasts for the next 5 years. We're already there in effect. We've come down quite a bit this year, so, but we're already at this point. Wage inflation is a real factor, and it's going to increase the general inflation rate in the coming year. So we already have a shortage of qualified workers here. It's a national problem. It will tend to be a drag on the economy. Some of the factors affecting how we do going out, and you can, the effects nationally and locally probably aren't that dissimilar. We've had some increase in energy prices because of the hurricane already built into here. We're going to get a little bit of that back over the course of the year. So for at least the short-term energy costs, this isn't just oil or gas at the pump, it's all energy. Energy prices aren't going to be a major factor in the economy going forward, except it will reduce cost to a little bit this next year compared to this year. And then we can expect some increase beyond that. Consumer confidence, if you're in the retail sector or in the real estate sector, this becomes important to watch. Anything over 100 is considered optimistic, so we could say people feel pretty good about the economy. They feel better about how the economy is doing today. It isn't this simple, but if I asked you, how do you think the economy is doing? You say, well, it's doing okay. I mean, or especially if you just won the lottery, or it's sort of what happened today or yesterday, or the reports you hear. People feel pretty good about the economy. How is it going to be doing 6 months from now? I'm not quite as sure. Still optimistic, but it's flattened out. There's growing uncertainty, but it isn't. People don't seem to be acting on it. This affects the willingness to take on risk. And so we've seen the housing market slow down this year. This isn't the only reason, but both new construction and resales are slower this year nationally than they were last year. And yet we actually haven't recovered. That sector hasn't gone back to '07 levels yet, even though the economy and the population have grown substantially since then. Consumer prices have popped up a little bit this year, still quite within the range of what the Federal Reserve Bank wants. A little bit of energy cost increase in here, but other costs as well. Expect them to take mainly energy, but also food and some other product. A little decline in 18 and then moving higher. And with that, of course, is going to come some interest rate management. We still expect to get another interest rate increase in December. Just a small increase, but it will take it up to 1 point, the Federal Reserve federal funds rate up to ranging in 1.25%, 1.5%, not having a big effect on mortgage rates yet, but over the course of the next 5 years, moving up to 3% or 6%. The norm on this, the historic average is 5.5 to 6%, so this is way below, but we also have inflation that's way below what some of us can remember back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And the average on this long-term average is 7.75. So these are still pretty good rates, but they will put some pressure on consumers as credit card rates go up and other interest rates, business loans. Small increases add to the cost. New home sales, as I mentioned, and existing have flattened out. All construction is down in the second quarter and third quarter, negative compared to a year ago, or less. There isn't as much as there was a year ago, negative in that sense. Last year was a pretty good year, and this is a combination. There's less public expenditure in infrastructure, there's less commercial reinvestment, an expansion of new capacity, and home builders aren't building as much because they don't see the market. So that's sort of a little disappointing. That's the downside of the story today. How do you get to 3% GDP growth when this represents 60 to 65% of it? This is consumption spending for you and me, as well as businesses and government all rolled together, and it's not bad compared to what we had here since the recession, or during the recession and since. But there's not a large expected increase in this. And an infrastructure program, if something like that moves through Congress and is approved, would change this to a degree by getting more spending into the pipeline. But individuals aren't interested in, they're increasing their savings, paying down debt where they can, moving their debt to lower interest rate exposure, and managing their economies. And one lesson that came out of the recession is that consumers are much more careful than they were in '05. And then the forecast, short-term forecast for this year, the third quarter, which we're through now, will have taken a little bit of a hit because of the hurricanes. Fourth quarter, some recovery to that. Strong first quarter of next year, and this adds up to about a 2.4%. This is an add up to about a 2.1 or 2.2%. A little bit better. 19 may in fact be a better year than 18 if the proposed tax revision is adopted. It's going to take a while for that. That doesn't affect the economy until people start actually having more disposable income and business actually realize a lower tax rate. So we're sort of confronting a pretty nice picture that the economy, even if you would like it to be better, it isn't bad, and it is going to be a little bit stronger, at least by all measures. There seems to be a consensus that 17 will be better than 16, 18 will be better than 17, 19 might be better. And then after that, it doesn't go negative, it just runs out of juice. And of course, that could change. So, the Washington area, I like to tell people, show them what it is we're talking about. It's really a big region. This is the census definition, not the Washington Post definition. And you can see how big Northern Virginia is. This is more than 6,000 square miles, 6.2 million people, almost 4 million jobs. And Northern Virginia is half of it. We've just added Culpeper and Rappahannock counties to it in the last 2 years. And these are connected. All of these places are connected because of their commuting shed. It's if 25% of the people who live here commuting here to work, they can be connected to it. I mean, it's basically an economic unit. And when I show this to a lot of people, they said, well, that's a long way to go to DC. Well, they're not going to DC, you know that. They're coming to Manassas, or they're coming into Route 28, and maybe to Tyson's. Very few of them are going all the way downtown. And the less expensive housing out here compared to in here clearly attracted a lot of people out there who do come in and work here or become part of your labor shed. When I'm down in Fredericksburg, they don't want to be included in the Washington metropolitan. They don't think of themselves in the metro area. But it is big, and by and large, Northern Virginia represents about half of this economy. And it isn't always half, but it's closer to half than 40% in most measures. What is disappointing, or maybe sobering, maybe a better term, about the Washington economy is that it has performed so weakly since 2010. Doesn't matter who we measure it against. I could put Detroit on there. Detroit outperformed us. So of all of the 15 largest metropolitan areas in the country, we have grown the slowest. And confirms how important the federal spending spigot has been to driving growth in this region. You can see how slow it was here. This averages 0.9% per year growth rate. Divide by 6. This also, here's Houston. This shows what happens when your specialization takes a hit, and that's the petrochemical. It isn't just oil drilling and repairing of oil rigs, that's a part of it, but it's the whole petrochemical company took a hit, and that's a big part of their economy. That's their federal government. We ranked 5th in the country in terms of the size of our economy. In 2015, they ranked 6th, now they rank 4th. Houston ranked 4th, now they rank 5th, or 6th. So these guys change places in order of magnitude of their total economy. But Boston, I like to think of Boston and Atlanta as good comparison bases because they both have strong governmental centers. They have state capitals, they have a strong federal presence, they're more diversified. They're smaller than we are, but they're more diversified. Atlanta, you'll see on another chart, is just booming. But this is a sort of a call for action because we clearly have the capacity to grow faster. We used to. Our job patterns. This is our federal spending impact there, mainly procurement, but we've lost $2 billion in federal payroll over that period as well. What can we say? We're having a good year job-wise. This is a better year than I expected at the beginning of the year by probably about 10,000 jobs. We're averaging 59,000 jobs a month through 9 months. And I thought we'd end up somewhere around 45 this year. So this is a strong performance. Last month, the September performance wasn't as strong as the rest of the year. We've had 2 weak months this year, March and now September. That doesn't mean that October won't be gangbusters. But you can see these are the 15 largest in order of size. And then if we sort of put ourselves on there in rank order in terms of our population growth, we are the 6th largest by size, but we're the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th largest in production of new jobs. So we're not fighting at our weight class. And you can see where Dallas and Atlanta and Seattle and Boston, it just so happens that when I picked a show, are performing very strongly. And it usually comes that they're diversified in those areas that produce goods and services that are sold outside the region. They have exports, so they're bringing money into their region that then supports local jobs and retail spending, which is the way to build a strong economy. Boston wasn't always this way. Boston went through an enormous change when it was a seaport and a major manufacturing center. It's neither of those anymore. So it learned how to play differently. Our job growth tells the picture to an extent. We're losing federal jobs. The state and local pickup, this is mainly hiring for schools. And some of that is just that we have more school kids. And we grow from year to year, so you expect this. There's some variation in this, and that number changes, gets revised. When we look at this, some of these sectors aren't doing anything. Now, this is, by the way, this is 760,000 jobs. This is about 50. So these are in order, reverse order of size. So you'd expect these to be small gains down here. But no growth in financial activities or services. Wholesale trade clearly isn't one of our strengths. Manufacturing is doing nothing. These are, we can say this is okay, but our strength is here. Those are our office workers by and large. That's good. These are worth $158,000 per job to the economy. Education, health services, somewhere around $70,000, and leisure and hospitality, 60-something thousand. I have the numbers for you. But these, if you look at a 44 and you take you take 23 and 33, you get 3/4 of your job growth in 3 sectors. We're quite specialized, and yet this is what we are. We're a nation's capital. Leisure and hospitality is really important to us. We don't want to, it is our strength. Education and health services is one of our primary assets, our colleges that we have here. There's more than 100 colleges and universities in the Washington area with 400,000 students. We don't notice them, except George Mason, of course, we notice that. And this is where the federal contractors are, and this is where the lawyers are, and all the IT workers. This is what we want. And it's actually performing pretty well. Somebody can quickly do the math. 17 divided by 44. What percentage is that? So figure this out for me. It's a third, roughly. More than a third. This sector represents 23% of all the jobs in the region. So it's outperforming. It's growing now at a rate faster than it has historically, which is a very positive sign. These are the jobs you want in Prince William County. It's interesting to look at those jobs. These are those jobs, and they're mixed. This is sort of your support. These are, I think of those as the rainmakers, and these are the support personnel. During the recession, when you're cutting back, you cut back your support personnel. During the sequester, when the federal government pulled a contract, you got rid of your senior scientists or your engineers because you couldn't support them. We've added them back. The federal contracting declined by 15% between 2010 and 2013. It's come back a little bit, but this growth is by and large based on other kinds of market expansion, not federal. The federal market did get a little bit bigger, but it's only about $1.5 billion bigger today than it was a year ago, and that isn't supporting this kind of growth. So this shows that underlying our economy, there's been a pivot of some sort. The education and health services, a lot of education hiring and expansion here in the beginning part of the year. The health, the red stuff is hospitals, some contraction, small growth here, but these jobs don't pay as well. The yellow don't pay generally as well as the blue. But that's what we do, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just to keep in mind that when you see there's so many jobs being added that all jobs aren't equal. And the federal sector isn't doing anything for us. We're down, I don't know what it is today. 385, and over here we were at 365 from 387. So we're down 22,000 jobs at an average salary of about $130,000. There's not many GS6s in here, or 8s. These are 14s, 15s, and 16s. So we're not adding jobs at this point. This is largely natural attrition and slow hiring. It's taken a while for the new administration actually to put enough senior management in place and to decide what kind of hiring they want to do, and so they've been a little slow at this, and it may begin to pick up a little bit, or it may end up being what we see going out in the future. Leisure and hospitality, this little red stuff that you can see, this is MGM Casino. It didn't exist. It opened in December of last year, so this is comparing this year with this year. It didn't. So that's MGM Casino. All this dark stuff on here are all the restaurants and bars that you and I support. There's not a whole lot of tourism dollars. There is some. And then the yellow clearly is tourism. It's the kind, generally people, well that's, excuse me, red is accommodations, this is entertainment. So there's a mixture of export services in there, but there's a large dose of you and me going out to eat, which doesn't really help the economy greatly. It just takes food purchases from the grocery store and exchanges those for purchases in a restaurant. Northern Virginia. They say Northern Virginia typically has been about half of the job growth close to it. Its position this year, it is less than that. It's playing a smaller role. It's only a quarter of this. This was only a quarter. I don't know what happened in September. Remember, we have 44,000 jobs, so this is that bar is a quarter of the normal. Suburban Maryland has picked up share. We were very impacted by the sequester, more so than the other segments, the other sub-state areas. Started out the year strong and have slacked off slightly as we move forward. We get most of the office kind of jobs. We could argue we get most of the best jobs. And that number was what? Excuse me, I forgot. 17. So we had 17,000 jobs and we got 10,000 of them. It's a pretty good split. These are good, but look at all the weakness, the contraction or no growth at all. So in spite of all the efforts of the governors and the mayor and most local officials who have recognized we need to diversify the economy, it's really hard to do. It isn't, you can't wave a wand. This is our strength, and leisure and hospitality, that's the natural pullback that occurs after Labor Day. So that's probably just to be ignored. But there isn't a whole lot of strength there. Unemployment's a full point below the national average. So our wage inflation is even a bigger issue. So our forecast, I'm going to get to Prince William County now in a minute, is that we do expect to slow down. These are not just our forecasts, but if you look at commercial or proprietary forecasts that the state buys as well, shows a moderation in job growth. A lot of employers have as many workers as they need. They're getting more work out of them, more productivity, perhaps more hours. Should see some wage growth. We didn't see a whole lot of it this last month. But this shift to Maryland, that Maryland has had a better performance in here for a couple years in the middle point. Not probably a pattern that's going to be sustained, but Northern Virginia is weak in its role. This is growing concern to the state. Northern Virginia is 48% of the state's economy. If you count dollars, it's only 37% if you count jobs, but they're higher value-added jobs. So our performance, the yellow line is Northern Virginia, and you can see that it's expected to have a little bit stronger performance than the rest of the region in 18 and 19. But it was 4.2% growth rate back there in 2010. We're not producing the levels of output that the economy used to. We set a very strong dose. This is the peak of all federal spending, federal employment and federal procurement. That was the greatest of all time at that point. Northern Virginia got a really big chunk of it. So this is the dilemma, is moving from this economy, which where federal government, primarily procurement and secondarily payroll, was such a large stimulant within the economy, to one that's less. And this is a in round terms, this is a $400 billion economy. This is a $5.5 billion, or $400 million and $550 billion economy. 400. So the circles aren't the same size. They shouldn't be the same size. They're hard to draw them otherwise. So there's a lot of economic growth in here. The federal piece of it is about the same value. It's $170 billion, more or less, in each pie chart. And so this is the piece. This is the piece that's the most significant. It looks most like the federal contractor jobs, but it has to be supported by non-federal spending. And that's the research stuff, the stuff that can wrap around the Mason campus out here, the stuff that's looking for office parks. That's where Amazon would be if everybody likes to focus on their second headquarters as a dream. It might be a nightmare too, but first time I was asked about that by a radio station, I think it was WMAL, when the announcement came out, my initial reaction, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, was, why would you want 50,000 jobs? You think of how many school kids that represents, and how much traffic, and what it would do to the housing market. I mean, of course, they wouldn't all come at one time, but even 5,000 would be hard to swallow. The Marriott headquarters is only 3,500, and they're having a hard time accommodating that relocation in Bethesda. But anyway, that's where it would show up, that kind of activity, or many of the kinds of businesses that you see seeking locations around Dulles and along the metro. So I started with this, and I just want to remind you, so all that adds up to, if you figure out that, the cost of that, it's about $169 billion of earnings that we didn't get because of our economy being tied to the federal government, and the federal government pulling back during this time. And we will have not suffered, or we won't continue to suffer that, but we're not performing at a level that would be, if I put Boston on here, or Atlanta, they're going to be up here by another point or a point and a half or 2 points. Dallas, you have to pay people to go to Dallas, pay them more because the climate isn't so good. So I wanted to take a look because I didn't know some of this, and of course these numbers will change. This is a long time out, but I wanted to think about what I saw in the numbers and share that with you to start with, and because it tells something about where you are now and maybe some of the changes that are coming. So if you use as a base a projected population increase of 16%, just all of these could be different. Employment, though, the growth is almost 20%. So that's saying to me that over this period, I'll say 10 years, but we're already into this period, that you're going to grow your job base faster than your population base. And that's sort of what brings in a better fiscal balance. We're going to get to what kind of jobs these look like. Now, the people that hold these jobs may not live here. And so there's always a problem in data when you talk about residents, it's reported by where people live. When you talk about jobs, it's where they work. And so we know people are going both ways. So I looked at I took the total number of jobs and divided it by the residents to see what the percentage was. And it's of the jobs that are in the county, regardless of who holds them, that number is it's less than 1/3, so that you have 30% jobs and 70% people, that balance. And it gets just a tiny bit smaller, it picks up a point. So this faster growth rate says, well, we're shrinking that. We're shrinking the disparity between jobs and people. I can't tell you what that is for the Washington area. I should have done that. The best kind of job we could look for in terms of economic benefit, and the ones that dominate the region are professional business services. And they're going to grow almost 50%. So that if we start thinking now, what kind of jobs are we adding to grow that fast? Predominantly, they're going to be the kind of jobs, this is just, and these are projected to grow quite strongly throughout the region. So this isn't unusual, it just says that you're going to get a pretty good share of those. The education and health services are also going to outperform the overall employment. Leisure and hospitality just sort of going along with the average a little bit stronger. So if you take the average as your reference point, retail is going to be below average, wholesale is going to be below average. That isn't what's going to be your future strength, because you only need retail growth largely to support the people that live here, and so you wouldn't expect it to grow too much faster than this. And then there's unless you were attracting people from Fairfax County to shop here, or from Fauquier County to shop here, which may be the case. But so you're shifting to a less suburban structure. That's what I see. This is probably driven by suburban stuff. But this, and although Mason and other educational non-K through 12, remember this isn't K through 12, so this isn't publicly or local taxpayer funded generally. Now the economy, how's the economy going to do? The gross county product, that's the value of all this stuff. Well, in real terms, it's going to go up a little bit. So it's growing. And oh, I forgot a parenthesis. So what about household income? Household income here is above the average in the metro area, but that's because you have more two household income earners, or household, 2 earners per household than the rest of the region on average. So income's going to go up faster than employment or population. Personal income is going to grow up dramatically. I mean, the jobs you're adding are better than the jobs you have. That's one way to look at that. Putting retail sales, this is in real dollars and in average dollars, those are going to go up faster than population, which would suggest that the population that you're attracting has higher incomes. The jobs we're adding have higher incomes. And therefore, each household has more disposable income, and that's largely to get spent locally. So you still have a strong retail base. So I'm happy to go through this. I mean, I'm doing it out loud, but let me show you some more. So here are these 2 sectors which, by and large, define our strength in this region, and also are relatively strong in Prince George's County. The parenthesis is the equivalent percentage for the metro area, so you can benchmark yourself. So professional business services in 2015 for the metro area was 23% of all the jobs. Not quite, but only 14.5%, so you're underserved. You're going to pick up 4 percentage points during this period, but this is also going to pick up 3.5, so you may be closing, but very slightly. This is sort of this is your Christmas future that you can change. This is through various land use policies or marketing strategies and maybe incentives. These are things that can be changed, because this is business driven by business investment. These are largely, though they could be local serving, but this sector hosts most of the non-local serving export-based services that we have here. Health, a little less. Health and education, still just a point below. Leisure and hospitality, more specialized than the region. And so, and I put down in this fine print down here the value of these. So you can see the $158,000 to GDP for each job in the professional business services, health and education 72, and hospitality 51. But you have to have 3 of these jobs to basically equate to one of those jobs. It isn't really even equating at that point, because the spending patterns of this kind of earnings are quite different from the spending pattern of this, because they all have to buy this more or less the same kind of food. So one of the strategies, and as you think about this, is to focus on jobs that produce higher value so that they can buy more, they can pay more taxes, they can have a more expensive house and pay more taxes. They're not likely to have more kids in school, and maybe they'll send them to private school and not to public school.
Yeah, I'm not sure the time frame for these percentage changes.
Oh, this is the share. So this is the change. So this is of all jobs in the county, 14.5% of them in 15, and so clearly
snapshot in time.
So as I said, this is expected to grow dramatically. This is the growth over 10 years. This is a 10-year growth rate. So 5% per year, and this is 2.2%. And this is the the changing share. So we're under-specialized, but improving.
Gotcha.
And if we did this in Fairfax, I don't know for sure, but I would expect that Fairfax would be bigger than this. And you say, well, it should be because it's closer and has Tyson's and has more metro stations. That kind of. But still, this is the objective, to get this bigger. And that's what goes in these kinds of buildings. These are not all, these can be nonprofits, so they can be, you know, this building certainly fits in that category with. But the difference in the salaries, and just so you know, this is at the metro level. I can't figure this out at the county level. It just gives you a sense of how to relatively weight jobs. Financial services are worth, well, I can tell you, financial services are off the scale, $621,000 per job in the economy. So when you get the headquarters of something like Capital One, you say, well, yeah, there's a lot of clerical, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of economic power wrapped up in there, and what they can leverage. It isn't salaries. It's the manufacturing is worth almost $250,000 per job. So as you go through and think of a strategy of what kind of land use, it isn't just residential and commercial. It's and I would argue, I'd forget retail. Retail is going to take care of itself, and it's in a struggle just because of the trends that are going on in retail with online shopping and so forth, and changing consumption patterns of younger people aren't buying the same stuff that their parents bought. But it is driven by the incomes of households and how many you have. So that's the population factor. These other jobs, though, you can think about, well, what would attract those kinds of jobs to Prince William County? What qualities they want? The quality that we've discovered as we've talked to businesses in this category primarily that aren't federally dependent, they want talent. What they want most is a good workforce. And so that puts some pressure on having good housing and good schools and good parks, that you have these attractions, because that's what good talent wants. People that want to have that have the educational or skill sets that you need to attract the kinds of businesses that want to come here. And typically today, more so than 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the businesses don't go and think the talent's going to follow them. They're going to pick the talent, and that's exactly what Amazon's doing. We did a little analysis for fun. We looked at all the jobs that Amazon filled last year. They filled in Seattle more than 5,000 vacancies. And what kind of people they hired? By 6-digit NAICS code. So by occupational category. We have a higher proportion in every category of worker that they hired last year. We have a higher percentage of those workers in our economy than they do in the Seattle economy. Not the number, but as a concentration. We're specialized in what they want, and it would seem like, man, that would be exactly what the strength is. Come here because we have the kind of workers you need. And if you go to Raleigh, or go to some other place, those workers aren't there, and it's going to take forever to get them to want to go there or to accommodate them. So the strategy in my mind is to make sure you have the talent, and you do. I mean, we have lots of talent in Northern Virginia. I will tell you another story. Because this relates to Prince William County, I had a conversation with a Seattle firm that was looking to relocate or to locate in western Prince William County, near here. And they're already, this was in February and March, all ready to cut the deal. They needed 2,500 employees. And all of a sudden, the HR department of this company said, we're not sure we can find 2,500 employees that will do this work in western Prince William County. Well, they made a couple of mistakes. One is they thought they didn't know they were looking at Manassas and not Prince William. They didn't know our county structure different. They were looking at Fairfax City and not Fairfax County, and they thought people wouldn't come here to work from Culpeper. Of course, they'll come here from Culpeper. That's what they do, and or from Winchester. And these were blue collar kinds of jobs. They weren't bad jobs, but they still haven't decided what to do. And it's convincing people that you have the talent for the kinds of jobs you want to attract here. I have just a few more. I thought it would be, and this is the actual size of your economy, and this is in 2009 dollars, but they're constant dollars. And so this is the projected, this is in billions, growth. And one way it's interesting to look at what these jobs, if you divide the jobs in Prince William County into this number, the jobs into that number, this is what each job is worth on average. And so it's going up, and this is what the jobs in the metro area are worth on average. And so if it's any comfort, you say, well, we have better jobs than the other guys, or we're more productive. What you have is a better job mix. And of course, you're comparing, this has Charles County in it, it has Rappahannock, it has Warren, it has, so, but as you begin to think about how do we change this, the bigger this number is, or this number, how do we accelerate that? These are in constant dollars. So how do we accelerate this so that we have higher levels of disposable income that then filtrates through the economy? And then I wanted to get to the, I guess maybe the topic that's maybe foremost on your mind. When you think about whether it's residential or commercial development, it's a very complicated story. But one way to start at this is to evaluate what the impact on your budget is, not just property tax, but all revenue that would come in and all expenditures. And this could be done more precisely than I've shown here if you actually didn't assume that everybody needs to contribute to run the government on a per capita basis, and that everybody has access to the parks. And so you don't say, well, you use the park, you pay, and I don't use the park, so I shouldn't get charged for it. So there's an assumption underlying this that when you have public services that are available, basically free, like fire and police, whether you use it or not, it's available, or your judicial services within the county. And so if you begin to say, well, what does a person, you take all of the costs that relate to supporting people, the citizens of the county, it's almost $2,000. And what do they generate in revenue? Well, $130 less. It's not a big number. And what's important, though, is the school cost. This isn't the actual cost per student. It's the school cost divided by the total population. So the actual school cost per student is much different. And the real estate is, of course, a big piece of all the other revenues. It's the major piece. So as you begin to manipulate the land uses, you can say, well, and there's no education cost in this one. So this is your employee side. If we take all of the non-residential, which includes non-profit, tax-exempt public spaces, all that has to be covered because the county buildings need to have fire service, but they in effect aren't paying for them. So we charge it all to our commercial sector in this analysis, not to our residential sector. So if these are the principal variables, so that if everything we built was high quality and had a high real estate tax generation, it would make this number bigger. If this was 2,000 instead of 1,000, this number would be bigger and it would more than offset these. And if you can do it and attract fewer school kids, or an older population, or or if you just you can't manage our land use exactly that way, except on age-restricted residential. But you can look around and see where jurisdictions have managed, and Fauquier County, I think, is taking a little bit of heat about how they've tried to manage some of their land use development to discourage this side. I don't know that they've succeeded in encouraging this side. But my view is these numbers, clearly having more of this is better. But I don't know you can get more of this without having more of that. And so then it becomes, what kind of that do you want here? And I did a little project for Fairfax City a number of years ago, and it turns out that their principal source of economic growth was they tore down all their little houses, or they got torn down in the market, and they built big houses. And so all of a sudden, households with $40,000 income were replaced with households with $200,000, and it changed the whole economy. Now it's just a little tiny place, but the residents, and maybe the elected officials too, you weren't paying attention to how the economy changed, and then what the economic impact of that was, and it ultimately showed up in the tax base. But it was basically the kinds of, they weren't very successful in generating jobs, but they were generating people that had good jobs. They worked somewhere else, brought that money home and spent it locally and supported the local retail sector, and they managed to do a reasonably good job, still struggling a little bit, I think, in places, but in revitalizing the commercial core of Fairfax City. It's a tiny, specialized case. But from a fiscal standpoint, hard to argue that more jobs isn't better. But I think in today's economy, you get more, if these are all retail, they're not going to do this well, because the retail space tends to be shell space, or it isn't as high-end space as office space. Research space, I think you're going to do well here.
Dr. Fuller, nobody's ever laid this out this way. This is incredible, because on the county side, we've always looked at that per capita cost statically. We've never considered, at least I haven't, I mean, that we want the employers want the talent. To get the talent, we've got to build the types of housing that draws the talent. Then you draw the employers, and then of course the jobs that are created because of that offsets the cost to the immediate cost. And there's kind of a lag time there too.
There's a lag. And,
Right.
and the other piece, I mean, this is fiscal, but begin to think now, who are these new households? And if these are households that can afford a $600,000 or $700,000 house and a $400,000 mortgage, they have assets. And they bring, when they come and move here from somewhere else, they're bringing their financial capacity with them. And that then becomes available to the county economy, and it begins to support jobs. And so each one of us, I used to tell my wife and my two daughters they were spending units. I was the earning unit and the spending unit. And that I needed 3 jobs to keep up with them. But it is true, you know, if you think of ourselves as earning units and spending units, what we need, and if the earning unit has more earning capacity, then the spending is bigger, and that's what begins to balance this off. These aren't mutually exclusive. If I did this just for a new project, which I've done, and our most recent time together was on Carter Mill, which is this proposed project, I guess, which way is it from here? Haymarket. Which is age restricted. I mean, that is the perfect example, because there are no school kids, and the houses it's 2,000 instead of 1,000, and they're retirees, and they almost have no demand on local services, because they bring with them, each one of them brings with them $500,000 or $600,000 in equity in investments, and they're better than a factory. But you can't just say those are the only kind of people we want, because you actually need some rocket scientists and some
yeah, because the flip side, I guess what you're saying, the flip side of that though is that they're not creating jobs. I mean, assuming they're retired.
Their spending will support jobs.
They're supporting retail jobs,
yes,
right? But they're not creating professional business service jobs.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the long run, the kinds of professional business service jobs you want are probably ones that don't provide necessarily any local service to your residents. You really want them to be serving people in Omaha and in Texas and other places, because we have to think of these as providing services to the world. We're in a global economy, and that's where the highest return on investment is. So if we're only doing, you know, estate planning and divorces and orthodontry and that kind of stuff. We're only serving our local self. All the revenues earned come out of people that already live here, money that's already here. We need new money, and that's where the federal government and the federal contracting was so beautiful, because we were attracting tax dollars from all over the country and spending them in Washington. 15% of every dollar for goods and services purchased by the federal government gets spent in Washington. That's an enormous market share, 15%. And now that we don't have that, we have to replace it with something similar. And if that comes to this county, then it just is a gold mine. And one of your major attractions eventually, all that, the investment you have out here, the good fortune of picking up that land so cheap when it was distressed property 30 years ago or 20 years ago, however long it was around Mason, that whole area. And this is going to be a gold mine. You just have to get there between now and then. It may not be by 25, but you have to be patient and not misuse land too. And I think one of the challenges in planning is not to put up a project that underutilizes the full development potential of the property, because it's really hard to tear it down and recapture that land for 50 or 100 years. It's there forever. And so one, higher building code is important, and this was Prince George's County in Maryland did this. They wanted to get better quality housing. This was about 25 years ago, and the county executive said, well, we're going to require that all the houses built have brick in them instead of just wooden face. We're going to put brick facades, and we're going to require a garage. We're going to change our building code so the houses are better, and they will attract richer people to buy them. And it actually helped them, because they were just trying to get white tablecloth restaurants. They were trying to raise the local economy to a level, and they worked through housing. They had a minimum size of housing. I don't know that you could do this, but they required houses that had to be 4,500 square feet at a minimum, or whatever it was. But I remember it was the brick. The brick made the difference, and it made it a $400,000 house instead of a $300,000 house, and all of a sudden you have a different kind of income stream. So I think, let's see if I have anything else. Some other ways to think about that. These are just the multipliers. So for every $1 million of construction that you put into this county, this is for Prince William County, these multipliers, you get almost 6 jobs, and they only happen during the construction period, then they're over. But once something gets finished, that for every $1 million new that you get into retailing, spent in retailing, throws off not just retail jobs, but other kinds of jobs, because these retail operations need accountants and they need lawyers. So, then I begin to think of, well, we're all individually, we're worth a certain amount, and so we're like a business investment, and how much of that gets realized and captured within the local community, how much leaks out. So there's ways to think about it. Our website, if anybody wants me to send you an alert every time we have a report, it just tells you to go to the website.